Hi there, welcome to Bitesize, lesson number 31, Abraham's three mysterious visitors and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, one day while Abraham is hanging out at his tent, he's actually taking a rest during the heat of the day, he sees three mysterious men approaching. Now, few people ever traveled when the sun was up and really hot, so Abraham was curious. In keeping with the ancient rules of hospitality, Abraham rushes out to meet these strangers, insisting that they stay a while. Well, let's see how this scene is portrayed in the Bible miniseries from a few years back.
Welcome, Lord. Please, join me. Bring water. Prepare food for our visitors.
Yes, Master.
In there.
Next year, Sarah will have a son. Why do you laugh?
I didn't laugh.
You did. And when you have a son, you will name him Isaac, which means laughter.
You're on your way. Where are you going?
To decide the fate of Sodom.
While eating, the visitors ask where Sarah is. Abraham tells them that she's in the tent. One of these three visitors is the Lord, and believed to be what's known as a pre-incarnate appearance of Yeshua, Jesus, prior to his coming to earth as the Son of God and being born to Joseph and Mary. The one visitor who is the Lord, he says, I will come back next time this season, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Well, now, Sarah was eavesdropping, and upon hearing this, she laughed. As you saw in the film clip, her laugh is one of incredulity. After all, at this point, she's 89 years old, and Abraham's 99 years old. And here's the amazing thing. God comes all the way from heaven to give this good news to Abraham and Sarah in person. Genesis 18, verse 13. The Lord asked Abram, why did Sarah laugh and say, can I really have a child now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will come back to you this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Because she was afraid, Sarah denied that she had laughed. But the Lord said, oh, yes, you did. You laughed. Well, this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Verse 14, is anything too hard for the Lord? What's going on in your life right now that's too hard for the Lord? Nothing. If God can give Abraham and Sarah a son when they're way past childbearing age, then what can he do? He can do the impossible. I mean, do you need a miracle? Do you need something that is seemingly impossible at this moment in time? Well, look to the Lord, because nothing is too difficult or hard for the Lord. Whether it's finances, a job, a car, getting married, the need for a healing, or whatever else, God says, is anything too hard for the Lord? Well, that's a rhetorical question, because the answer is no. Nothing is too hard for the Lord. Then the Lord tells Abraham about the other reason for his visit. We read about that in Genesis 18:20. The Lord also said, Sodom and Gomorrah have many complaints against them, and their sin is very serious. I must go down and see whether these complaints are true. If not, I will know it. From there, the men turned and went on toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing in front of the Lord. Abraham came closer and asked, are you really going to sweep away the innocent with the guilty? And then Abraham starts bargaining with God because he's looking out for his nephew Lot. Abraham finally gets God to agree to spare Sodom and Gomorrah if he can find just 10 righteous people living there. Well, after God and Abraham's collective bargaining agreement, the scene shifts to Sodom and Gomorrah. Here's a picture, a map where we believe Sodom and Gomorrah were located. It's on the southwestern side of the Dead Sea. Genesis 19, starting verse 1. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gateway. When Lot saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed with his face touching the ground. He said, "Please, gentlemen, why don't you come to my home and spend the night? You can wash your feet there, and then early tomorrow morning you can continue your journey." "No," they answered, "we'd rather spend the night in the city square." But he insisted so strongly that they came with him and went into his home. He prepared a special dinner for them, baked some unleavened bread, and they ate. Before they had gone to bed, all the young and old male citizens of Sodom surrounded the house. They called to Lot and they said, "Where are the men who came to stay with you tonight? Bring them out so that we can have sex with them." And then Lot went outside and shut the door behind him. "Please, my friends, don't be so wicked," he said. "Look, I have 2 daughters who have never had sex. Why don't you let me bring them out to you? Do whatever you like with them, but don't do anything to these 2 men, since I'm responsible for them." So here's what's happened. Lot is sitting at the entrance to Sodom, which means that he had some authority. And being hospitable, he offers to put these 2 men up for the night. Now, I don't believe that he realized that they were angels from the Lord. The angels initially refused. They say they'd rather spend the night in the city square, probably because they wanted to get the lay of the land. But Lot, probably realizing what might happen to his guests if they spent the night in the city square, he convinces them to go to his house. After dinner, and just as they're getting ready to go to bed, we are told that all the men of the city, both young and old, surrounded Lot's house, banging on his door and calling out to Lot, "Where are the men who came to stay with you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." In other words, all the men of Sodom and Gomorrah were engaged in homosexuality, and they basically wanted to gang rape Lot's 2 visitors. This is the wickedness that was going on in Sodom, and that's why God was going to bring judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, Lot does a strange thing, but not really. He steps outside the door and tries to reason with the men of the city. He knew them, and they knew him. He offers them his daughters, and he says, "You can have sex with my 2 daughters." Now, why did Lot offer up his daughters to the men of the city? I mean, what father would do such a thing, offering his daughters to a sexually charged mob? Well, here's the thing. Lot never intended for any harm to come to the messengers or his daughters. Lot knew that when the men spoke, they revealed their interest was for men, not women. So almost mockingly, Lot offered them not his men, but his daughters. They would have been happy if Lot had offered them up sons. But what he did was shift the attention from the messengers to anger and hatred for Lot himself. Because here's what happened after Lot offered the men of the city his 2 daughters. And we read about it in Genesis 19, verse 9. But the men yelled, "Get out of the way. This man came here to stay a while, and now he wants to be our judge. We're going to treat you worse than those men." They pushed hard against Lot, and they lunged forward to break down the door. The men inside, the angels, they reached out, they pulled Lot inside the house with them and shut the door. You see, Lot traded his own safety for the safety of everyone in his house. Lot psychologically manipulated the mob. You see, really, Lot proved to be selfless. By offering the men his 2 daughters, they thought that he was mocking them. Why? Because they had no interest in his daughters. It was the 2 men that they wanted. Genesis 19, verse 11. And then they, the 2 angels, they struck all the men who were in the doorway of the house, young and old alike, with blindness, so they gave up trying to find the door. The angels struck with blindness the men who were outside the house. In verse 15, as soon as it was dawn, the angels urged Lot by saying, "Quick, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you'll be swept away when the city is punished." When he hesitated, the men grabbed him, his wife, and his 2 daughters by their hands, because the Lord wanted to spare Lot. They brought them safely outside the city. Verse 17, as soon as they were outside, the angels said, "Run for your lives. Don't look behind you, and don't stop on the plain. Run for the hills, or you'll be swept away." And now we come to Genesis 19, verse 23. The sun had just risen over the land as Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord made burning sulfur and fire rain out of heaven on Sodom and Gomorrah. He destroyed those cities, the whole plain, all who lived in the cities, and whatever grew on the ground. Lot's wife looked back, and she was turned into a column of salt. Early the next morning, Abraham came to the place where he stood in front of the Lord. He looked towards Sodom and Gomorrah and all the land in the plain, and he saw smoke rising from the land like the thick smoke of a furnace. When God destroyed the cities on the plain, he remembered Abram. Lot was allowed to escape from the destruction that came to the cities where he was living. Well, here's that scene depicted in the 2013 miniseries, The Bible in the Beginning.
Keep moving, come on! Keep moving! Come on! Do not look
back at the city of sin. Okay. Believe in God. Do not look back. Lord. Don't look back!
Lot's wife is turned into a pillar of salt for disobeying God. Lot and his daughters flee to the mountains, never to see Abraham again.
Encyclopedia Britannica reports that archaeological evidence indicates that the area was once fertile with fresh water flowing into the Dead Sea in sufficient amounts to sustain agriculture. There is evidence that a catastrophic destruction occurred. The petroleum and gases existing in the area probably contributed to the imagery of brimstone and fire that accompany the geological upheaval that destroyed the cities. Well, in our next lesson, Bitesize 32, we'll look at Abraham, the father of many nations, and God asks Abraham to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. That's coming up in lesson number 32. Until then, this is Pastor Dale saying, Shalom.